In this section of the course, you're just going to get a little bit of a background on early modern South Asia, a social historical approach. Now, there are four important South Asian societies of note from the 14th century through the 19th century that you need to keep in mind while reading: the Vijayanagara Empire, the Bahmani Sultanate, and the Deccan Sultanates, as well as the Mughal Empire. The Vijayanagara Empire, also called the Karnata Empire and the Kingdom of Bisnagar by the Portuguese, was based on the Deccan Plateau in southern South Asia. It was established in 1336 by the brothers Harihara I and Bugaraya I of the Sangama dynasty, members of a pastoralist cowherd community that claimed Yadava lineage. As a reminder, the Yadavas, meaning literally descended from Yadu, were a cowherd clan or a jati of ancient Indian peoples who believed themselves to be descendants from this legendary king Yadu. It can be inferred from the Vamsha Nucharita, or the genealogy sections of a number of major Puranas, that the Yadavas spread out over the Aravalli region of Gujarat and the Narmada Valley in northern Deccan in the eastern Ganges Valley. In the Mahabharata and the Puranas, there are mentions that the Yadus or Yadavas were sort of confederacy comprising of numerous clans and various rulers of the Mathura region. The Mahabharata also refers to the exodus of the Yadavas from Mathura. So if you think about this in the Vijayanagara Empire, claiming to be descended from the Yadavas is sort of asserting this legendary religious connection. The Vijayanagara kings were tolerant of all religions by repute, although they also had various perceptions that showed a bit of preference to protection of Shaiva Brahmanism. So, for example, the kings used titles like Gobrahmana, Pratipalacharya, meaning literally protector of the cows and Brahmins, and also Hinduraya Suratrana, meaning upholder of the Hindu faith. This sort of testifies to their intention of protecting Hinduism and yet being aware of other customs. And it's notable that historical records show that the Vijayanagara Empire was staunchly Islamicate in their court ceremonies and dress. The empire's founders, the Sangama brothers, Harihara I and Bugaraya I, came from this lineage that claimed Yandava connections, but they're devout Shaivas, worshippers of Shiva, although they did make grants to the Vaishnava orders of Sringeri and Vidyaranya as their sort of patron saint. And they also designated Varaha, the boar and avatar of Vishnu, as one of their imperial emblems. Notably, in Vijayanagara settlements, especially in the major cities, it's relatively common to find archaeological evidence of an Islamic quarter, and there is some evidence that suggests that in the conquest of other sort of borderlands regions during expansion, Islamic and Muslim populations came under a bit of pressure from the empire. Nonetheless, the empire had, after all, unified the Hoysala Empire, the Kakatiya dynasty, the Kampili kingdom, the Mathurai Sultanate, the Padyan dynasty, the Musunuri Nayaks, and also the Reddy dynasty. So a number of different Hindu empires and kingdoms, as well as that Madurai Sultanate. Nonetheless, in the form of imperial expansion, there were conquests that destroyed temples. As part of this, nobles from Central Asia's Timurid kingdoms, nonetheless, also visited the Vijayanagara Empire. The later Saluva and Tuluva kings were of Vaishnava orientations, but worshipped at the feet of the Lord Virupaksha, which was a representation of Shiva at Hampi, as well as Lord Venkateshwar, which is a representation of Vishnu at Tirupati. The Sanskrit work, the Jambavati Kalyanam by King Krishna Deva Raya, refers to Lord Virupaksha as Karnata Rajya Rakshamani, the protective jewel of Karnata Empire. So you can see that they're sort of, while being Shaiva, also paying homage to certain elements of Vaishnava traditions as well. The kings patronized saints, in fact, also of the Dvaita order, of the philosophy, the school of dualism, by Madhvacharya at Udupi. So there's recognition of the Dvaita order as well. Endowments were furthermore made to temples in the form of land, cash, produce, jewelry, and constructions. The Bahmani Sultanate was a Persianate Muslim empire on the Deccan Plateau in South Asia that was the first independent Muslim kingdom of the Deccan and then grew into a sultanate. It was also known for its perpetual wars with nearby rivals, which were by majority vastly Hindu, many of whom would outlast the sultanate, including Vijayanagara. The kingdom later split into 5 successor states or sultanates, known collectively as the Deccan Sultanates, that would eventually sack the Vijayanagara capital after the Battle of Talikota. According to an unverified founding myth, Zafan Khan, the founder of the Bahmani Sultanate, had earlier been a servant or slave of a Brahmin ruler named Gangu. Hence the name Hasan Gangu. Now, this individual had educated Zafar in Hinduism and made him a general in his army, thus illustrating that while there were Hindu kingdoms, there were Muslims who were participants in those sort of imperial expansions. Much like in the expansions of the Bahmani Sultanate, there would be Hindus involved in those expansions as well. So we're not talking about religiously distinct and completely segregated empires and kingdoms here, which is important to keep in mind. Nonetheless, before the establishment of his kingdom, this individual, this Khan, was a governor of Deccan and a commander on behalf of the Tughlaqs. In 1347, on August 3rd, Nasir-ud-Din Ismail Shah, who had revolted against the Delhi Sultanate, Delhi being a nearby New Delhi today, centered in that region up by the Ganges, he then stepped down that day in favor of Bahman Shah, a native of Delhi. His revolt was successful, in other words, and he established an independent state on the Deccan Plateau within the Delhi Sultanate's southern borderland provinces, with its headquarters at Hasanabad, also known as Gulbarga, and titled himself Alauddin Bahman Shah Sultan, founder of the Bahmani dynasty. His coins were also minted at Hasanabad as well. Muhammad Shah II was succeeded by his son Mahmud Shah Bahmani, who became eventually the last Bahmani ruler to have real power. The last Bahmani sultans were sort of puppet monarchs under their Barid Shahi prime ministers, where the prime ministers had actually more power than the monarchs, and the prime ministers were the de facto rulers, a sort of important position that would become prominent across South Asia. Prime ministers are very important positions. After 1518, the Sultanate broke up into the 5 successive states, Nizam Shahi of Ahmednagar, and then Qutb Shahi of Golconda and Hyderabad, and then Barid Shahi of Bidar and Imad Shahi of Berar and Adil Shahi of Bijapur would become the rulers of these Deccan sultanates. The South Indian Emperor Krishnadeva Raya of the Vijayanagara Empire defeated the last remnant of the Bahmani Sultanate power in a battle which caused the Bahmani Sultanate to collapse eventually. Rulers of the dynasty believed that they were descended from this great figure of Iranian legend and lore. The Bahmani sultans were patrons of the Persian language, culture, and literature, and some members of the dynasty became well versed in that language and composed literature in that language as well. The first sultan, Alauddin Bahman Shah, is noted to have captured 1,000 singing and dancing girls from various surrounding Hindu temples after he battled northern Carnatic chieftains. The later Bahmanis also would enslave civilian women and children in many wars. Many of them also subsequently converted to Islam, with some debate about whether or not this conversion was forced. Of course, the records from Bahmani itself say that it was not. Hindu historians who are hyper-nationalist have sometimes contended that it is. So there's argument about that. But it's important to understand the positions of the people who are levering the argument that it is as well. The craftspersons of Bidar were so famed for their inlay work on copper and silver that this actual work became known as Bidri in the early modern world. The architecture was also particularly prominent. The Gulbarga Fort and the Jama Masjid, pictured here in the background, and the Bidar Fort, pictured here in the top right, as well as the Madrasa Mahmud Gawhan, which is in the background of the slide in Bidar, are major architectural contributions of the Sultanate. The Deccan Sultanates were 5 early modern Indian kingdoms, also known as sultanates because of the title Sultan, between the Krishna River and the Vindhya Range, and ruled by Muslim dynasties. Again, Ahmednagar, Berar, Bidar, Bijapur, and Golconda. So, the sultanates had become independent during the breakup of the Bahmani. In 1490, for example, Ahmednagar declared independence. Golconda became independent in 1518, and Bidar in 1528. Although the 5 sultanates were ruled by different dynasties, their founders were also incredibly diverse, and often originally not Muslim. So, for example, Ahmednagar Sultanate was founded by individuals of Hindu Brahmin origins who converted willingly to Islam. The Berar Sultanate by Kanaris Hindus. The Bidar Sultanate was founded by former Turkic enslaved peoples who were immigrants in that case, whereas the Bijapur Sultanate was founded by a Georgian or Guz Turkic enslaved immigrant, and the Golconda Sultanate was founded by individuals of Turkmen origin. So you have a sort of mix here of some sultanates being founded by local Hindus who convert, and others being founded by various Turkic peoples who are moving into the region. Although general rivals, the sultanates did ally with one another against the expansions of the Vijayanagara Empire in 1565 especially, which led to a permanent weakening of the positions of the borderlands of the Vijayanagara Empire in the Battle of Talikota. Notably, the allegiance destroyed an entire city of Vijayanagara, with important temples such as the Vitala Temple being razed to the ground, a historical event which is conjured up again and again in modern history to point towards the quote-unquote violence of the Deccan Muslims, right? And this is from the perspective, again, of far-right Hindu nationalists during the modern period. So it's important to keep those biases in mind. Nonetheless, this event did happen. The culture of the Deccan Sultanates, nonetheless, was actually complex, and the Deccan Sultanates made a number of cultural contributions in the field of literature, art, architecture, and music to South Asia. An important contribution, for example, was the development of the Deccani language, which, having started under the Bahmani rulers, developed into an independently spoken literary language with its own unique culture during this period, continuously borrowing from Arabian, Persian, Marathi, Kannada, and Telugu languages. Deccani later became known as Deccani Urdu to distinguish it from the Urdu that is spoken in Pakistan today. Deccani miniature paintings also became quite prominent. They flourished in the courts of Ahmednagar, Bijapur, and Golconda. Architectural splendors of Deccan, such as the Charminar and Gol Gumbaz, belong to this period as well. The religious tolerance of the various rulers, especially Nizam Shahi, Adil Shahi, and Qutb Shahi rulers, is also worthy of mention. The Charminar, literally 4 minarets construction, pictured on the bottom left, from 1591, is a monument and mosque located in Hyderabad, Telangana, in India. Golconda is the tomb of the king Muhammad Adil Shah and the Adil Shah dynasty, pictured on the bottom right, from Karnataka, which was started in 1626 and completed in 1646. In 1574, after the coup in Berar, Ahmednagar invaded and conquered other elements of the surrounding lands. Then in 1619, Bidar was annexed by Bijapur, so you have contestations between these sultanates as well. However, the sultanates were definitively conquered by the expansions of the Mughal Empire, as Bihar was stripped from Ahmednagar in 1596, and the conquest of Ahmednagar was completely taken up by 1616 and 1636, while Golconda and Bijapur were conquered by Aurangzeb's militaries in 1686 through 87. Now we're going to close here with the focus on the Mughal Empire, which was the largest and most significant early modern empire in South Asia. For some 2 centuries, the empire stretched from the outer fringes of the Indus Basin in the west to northern Afghanistan in the northwest and Kashmir in the north to the highlands of present-day Assam and Bangladesh in the east, as well as the uplands of the Deccan Plateau in southern South Asia. The Mughal Empire is conventionally said to have been founded in 1526 by Babur, a warrior chieftain from what is today Uzbekistan, who employed aid from the neighboring Safavid and Ottoman empires to defeat the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the First Battle of Panipat, and to sweep down into the plains of the Upper Ganges. The Mughal imperial structure, however, is sometimes dated to 1600, to the rule of Babur's grandson Akbar the Great. This imperial structure lasted until 720, until shortly after the death of the last major emperor, Aurangzeb, during whose reign the empire achieved its maximum geographical extent. The period of this 17th to 18th century expansion was exhaustive, however. Reduced subsequently, especially during the expansion of East India Company rule in India to the region in and around Old Delhi, the empire was formally dissolved by the British Raj after the Great Rebellion of 1857, which I cover quite a bit in History 122 if you ever need a refresher. The Mughal Empire was definitively an early modern and modern empire, prominent in South Asian history, with its legacy lasting and impacting the histories of the modern states of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. Seen in the cultural contributions such as the Taj Mahal construction in Agra, India's centralized imperial rule that consolidated smaller polities fundamentally transformed the subcontinent during the 2 centuries in question. The amalgamation of Persian art and literature with Indian art was another contribution. The Badshahi Mosque, Lahore, Punjab, and Pakistan, the development of Mughalai cuisine, and the amalgamation of South Asian, Iranian, and Central Asian Culinary styles is also a notable feature of the Mughal Empire. The development of Mughal clothing, jewelry, and fashion, utilizing richly decorated fabrics such as muslin, silk, brocades, and velvet, were another hallmark of Mughal culture. The standardization of the Hindustani language, the colloquial language of Bollywood, and thus the development of Hindi and Urdu is also a hallmark of this empire. The introduction of sophisticated Iranian-style waterworks and horticulture throughout Mughal gardening is another feature, as well as the introduction of Turkish-style baths into the subcontinent. The evolution and refinement of Mughal and Indian architecture in turn led to the development of the later Rajput and Sikh palatial architectures. A famous Mughal landmark, of course, would be the Taj Mahal. Everyone knows that. But you also have the development of Hindustani classical music and instruments such as the sitar, being a hallmark of the Mughal courts. Jahangir was born to Akbar the Great, however, and his wife, Maryam-uz-Zamani, was actually an Indian Rajput princess. The reason I bring this up is because, in fact, when we're speaking about Mughal court culture, you're talking about a sort of hybridized, syncretic Hindu religious court culture. That being said, there would be contests between this court culture, especially during the period of Akbar, with the Sikh community. Shah Jahan, a subsequent ruler who ruled from 1628 to 1658, was born to Jahangir and his wife Jagat Gosaini, another Rajput princess. During the reign of Shah Jahan, the splendor of the Mughal court reached its apogee, as exemplified by this Taj Mahal construction. The cost of maintaining the court, however, began to exceed the revenue coming in, and Shah Jahan's reign was, although called the golden age of Mughal art and architecture, perhaps short-lived. Akbar holds religious assemblies of different faiths in the Ibadat Khana in Fatehpur Sikri during his reign, but Shah Jahan's eldest son, the liberal Dara Shikoh, became regent in 1658 as a result of his father's illness, and Dara actually championed a syncretic form of Hindu-Muslim culture, explicitly so. With the support of Hanafi scholars, however, a younger son of Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb, reigned from 1658 to 1707, after he seized the throne. Aurangzeb defeated Dara in 1659 and had him executed. Now, although Shah Jahan eventually fully recovered from his illness, Aurangzeb declared him incompetent to rule and kept Shah Jahan imprisoned until his death in 1666. Now, this is not imprisoned in a dungeon. This is like imprisoned in a Mughal palace. It's not the worst form of house arrest. During Aurangzeb's reign, however, the empire gained political strength once more and became the world's most powerful economy. Aurangzeb oversaw the increase of Islamicization of the Mughal state and encouraged some forms of Islam to spread. He reinstated the jizya on non-Muslims, expanding it, however, to explicitly Hindus. What this means is that Hindus had to pay the jizya tax. Now keep in mind that Muslims are actually paying a greater tax in the form of zakat, but they're getting greater rights. That being said, there's a jizya for Christians, Jews, and so forth, as well as now Hindus, where if you pay into this tax, you get secured a certain number of rights. Furthermore, the Mughal empires actually have been somewhat contested by modern historians. Now, a few historians argue the religious conservatism of Aurangzeb and intolerance undermined the stability of Mughal society. However, the majority of historians today actually question this. noting that he built an extensive number of Hindu temples, patronizing the Hindu community, and employed significantly more Hindus in his imperial bureaucracy than his predecessors did. He also opposed bigotry against Hindus and Shia Muslims, and followed previous Mughal traditions of marrying a Hindu Rajput princess, in this case Nawab Bai. So, for your post, go ahead and make a note of anything surprising from this early modern history of South Asia that jumped out to you. If a thread has been started already, go ahead and comment on that thread. If you have a related comment, make a short post and let's get the discussion going.